All right, it doesn't say this meeting is being recorded, but it's showing.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for joining us today at JALT International 2020. Please welcome Colin Bethell from EnglishBooks.jp, who will be presenting Teaching Digitally and Remotely, Feedback of 2020. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry, I may not pronounce your name right, but Marie-Alesse has put her hand up. So please, yeah, do unmute and tell us your question if you have one.
I think that's just the clap. That's the clap button.
It's a clap. It's a clap. Thank you very much. Okay, so this presentation was set up actually before JALT was an online conference. So I submitted the abstract and the suggestion around about May the 10th, I think it was, and that was before the conference actually went online. So I thought about changing it. But then, as you know, all of us, this year we've had such a crazy year that we never know what's going to happen by the end of the next month. So I thought there's no point changing it because I'll only get it wrong if I do. So I've left it as it is. And the important part of it is that it's about trying to find something practical that participants can take away with them today. Now, my current job is englishbooks.jp, so I'm selling books. We also publish a little bit, but my background is from working with publishers, about 20 years worth, and about half of that has been ELT publishing. And to give you an indication, my first digital sales were in 1997. So that was selling academic online materials actually in CD form, CD-ROM, that were then stacked in libraries and made available across the network, because it was just before the internet actually came in publicly. You know, people had the internet, but it wasn't really being used in universities at that time. And then within a year or two it was. So all of the CDs became obsolete and the internet, everything moved to the internet. And the reason I'm telling you the story is because this transformation to digital has already been made by many people around the world in their different worlds. And the academic world, as you know, whenever you do your research, the journals are online. Now, back in the 90s, those journals were all on separate websites by each publisher, kind of. And then there's these companies called aggregators that came along. So there was a few of those, and then the aggregators themselves were aggregated. But the overall conclusion was that the demand of the users, which was mainly librarians and academics, was that they wanted one platform. Now, if you think about this year and the fact we've been thrown into this situation, so we really means everybody. I mean, us in the book selling and publishing business, we've got our own challenges along with the education challenges that you teachers have too. So, so therefore, this session, what we'll do is I can run through a sort of a summary of where we are from an angle that perhaps you don't get in other presentations at JALT. And what I mean by that is that of course, as I say, I put my presentation in May and I thought about changing it, but then I realized that JALT was very quickly accommodating teachers to present on digital issues. And in fact, they opened a window for presenting on such issues, specifically to sort of give people a chance to chop and change and add extra presentations on the digital classroom. So I imagined at that time that that's all going to be covered, and I think it is. I think it is being covered very adequately. There's plenty of really rock solid presentations going on today and tomorrow that will cover the, if you like, the pedagogical side of the digital education. Now, there is another side that I think a lot of people ignore, and it's not just me thinking it, but I work now in a bookseller, so I'm responsible for running the office there, even though the office is remote from me, and it was before the digital situation. I live in Kanagawa, and my office, which has about 30 people in it, is in Miyazaki-ken. Now, not all of those people are my responsibility or the office itself. We have a warehouse as well, but a good few of them, sort of 5 to 10 of them, are running our ELT business, and I run that for them remotely here. Now, what happened as teachers were suddenly having to face the new reality is that was being inflicted on us too, of course. So we have this situation where, I mean, the most obvious thing to think is, oh no, there's no book sales because nobody wants books. It's absolutely not that simple, as I'm sure you now realize. So what has happened, and this really took me back to my previous experiences back in the 90s, is that you have, at that time, it was sort of half the university libraries in the world were ready and half weren't. It seemed like that. So I would have questions from a low level from people that hadn't yet started on that journey, and I'd get questions from very high level, way above my level, because these librarians were far more technically able than me, and they were asking me questions I didn't understand the question, let alone the answer. And I think that is now happening again. Excuse me one moment, I've got a phone which I forgot to turn off here, so I'll just turn that off. And so what we've seen over this course, which is the relevant part here, is that we've seen some of the pitfalls that you may not come across elsewhere. And what I mean by that is, if we think through the story of the late spring, early summer, then what happens is you have a sort of a change of the landscape in teaching suddenly, and most people didn't know what was happening, and in fact most of the books had been ordered at that time. So pretty much, I mean, I'm generalizing here, okay, you may have different experience, but very generally I would say most of the teachers affected by this, their books were already either on a truck on their way, or they were waiting somewhere close by to be delivered to the class, because Japan emergency state was around about March the 25th, and books were shipped by then. So, and if they hadn't been, I think the story would have been very different. But what that means is that generally teachers had to try and unite themselves and students with materials they'd already ordered. And that was sometimes fairly straightforward and sometimes very difficult. But then after they'd united themselves with it, they had the real issue of what are we going to do? We being teacher and new students, what are we going to do now with the materials we've got? So if you were a lucky teacher and you managed to get the books to your students and you had a book yourself, then you've got more options, shall we say. Now, before we go any further, let's just stop on that word book, because what we're really talking about is the content of your course. So the book is just one way of presenting the content of the course. So what I'm going to do, I just split this into 3 parts. And the first part is just going and assessing the review of the experiences that have been had. And we only have a few people in the room. Nice to see you, Mike, by the way. And what we'll do, if you feel happy sharing some of your experiences, I'd like to make this a bit more customized to your needs today. But this summary is sort of from my side to start us off and say this is what we saw. So the review of what happened is this. As I say, some of the teachers got books, some of them didn't, because the books were, I mean, Seikyos were locked down and the books were locked inside. We had quite a lot of that. And as a result, some of the books were sent back to us, some of the books were cancelled. But actually, most of the books were dissipated outwards to students, one way or another. And to give you an example of how that happened, we have a direct selling website. So we sold a lot of books one by one, which is not what we usually do. We usually sell class copies. We noticed a lot of sales going through Amazon one by one. we noticed and still do that Japanese booksellers who we probably all have some experience of the traditional book trade in Japan. I don't want to be sort of unpleasant or sarcastic about it, but I genuinely think that this year has accelerated that book trade about 10 years, but it's still 10 years later than it has been in many other countries. So what I mean by that is that the successful booksellers very quickly started their mini Amazon sales, if you like. They're selling locally in, for example, my area is Kanagawa, and there's a bookseller here called Yorindo, which has is very strong in Kanagawa, and they've got quite a few shops and people that visit schools to sell. And the salespeople don't go out, so they sit in the office and they mail out, and they call the teacher and they say, how many books do you want, where do you want them? And they're even sending to students' homes. So this is, if you like, my experience of the books. Now, just before I pass on and see if we can get some questions and some other points going from the audience, then there's a little bit more to this book story, and that was that we reach a sort of a fork in the road in the classroom. So whether you have the book or whether you don't have the book is the first fork. And if you don't have it, then it's where is your content coming from for this semester that was the issue. Now, if you do have the book, then the content is taken care of. And for many teachers, I think most, that was the case, that in the end, they got their books to the students. They had their own book. And so the content is taken care of. And then all you poor teachers out there had to do, you know, what I'm doing now is catching up on how to use Zoom in lightning time. So, let's face it, Zoom is not anything to do with content. It's really a window on the world, just like so many other communication channels, but yeah, it seems to be a very strong one. Of course, I think Zoom's really done well this year. But there are other ways of doing it. You know, you can even do it with just a Skype connection or something. But the point is, there's a separation of content and the delivery technology. So the final part of this sort of first part of this meeting, this presentation today is, so even if you did get your book, what are you going to do with it? So your book is your content, and there is variation, and these final points are the sort of provocative points, I hope, to elicit some feedback from you, and then we can decide where to go in this discussion. So I came across 3 or 4 different scenarios generally. The first one was where people wanted a digital version of their book, the book they had in their hand. They said, look, is there a digital version? So we spent a lot of time talking to publishers about that, and sometimes we could supply it and sometimes we couldn't. Then there was the, can we have not just a digital book, but we'd like to move from, for example, a Pearson book to, I think First-Hand Access is one of a good example, or Q from Oxford. And these are books that you can buy in 2 versions already. And they'd bought the wrong one because they didn't know that, well, who did? Nobody knew what was going to happen. But once the emergency state kicked in and the university told the teachers to teach online, we had this swap to the digital version workbook, for example, or the student book. And you usually have to pay like 300 yen extra for the digital thing. And most people don't buy it. But of course, that's all changed. So that's the sort of second thing, is a book with the digital components. And then the third one is a more dramatic shift to digital, where perhaps you may have a book or you may not, but the bulk of what you're doing is online. And then what you're talking about is a proprietary digital delivery. Proprietary, I'm using that word to mean something like, if you bought the Pearson system, then you're on that system. And you've got, it may be a very good one, but you've got to learn it. Hopefully it's pretty straightforward. But if your head of department then changes to a Cambridge book or an Oxford book, then next year you've got to learn a different one. And that's not that difficult. It's a bit like the difference between using Zoom and Teams. But then if you're changing your platform as well, then you've got two things you've got to learn every time. So what I'm getting at is there's this technology platform changing issue. And then finally, the last thing I would say is that whether you're using, if you're using a book, it's exactly what a digital book is. So I think it means different things to different people. And the provision of digital books that we've had to provide in the last semester or so has been probably about 5 different types of provision. So a book that's on a platform, a book that's part of a LMS, a learner management system, or a PDF. A lot of people have used PDFs or even photographs of the books. So we've got all of these different variables, and just to bring back the summary about what this presentation is about, it's about using the feedback to help teachers make decisions that will be efficient decisions for the next semester, whenever that is, whenever you next make your book, well, your content decision, because let's face it may not be a book. So I'd like to try, after listening to a few questions from you, try and take this in a direction where it's helpful for you people that have turned up today. So what I'll do for a moment is just stop and feel free to add any comments or ask any questions. And my overall question to you attending is there something that I could help you with in the direction? So for example, for want of a better word, why are you here and what would you like to get from this afternoon's session? Now, if you're not in a position to comment, I'll be happy to just run through the rest of my story, but it probably won't take an hour.
Actually, I have a quick question.
Sure.
What range of books do you have? Is it from young learners to adults?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, our company is a kind of a one-stop shop. We try to be a one-stop shop for ELT materials. So even if we don't normally supply it, we certainly try to get something if it's related to ELT and somebody asks for it. We quite often have bespoke orders overseas because importing, and for class copies, it's okay if you want one book, you can just go to amazon.com, but if you want 35 and you might want to return 3 of them, then that's a bit more difficult. So.
And actually, just one more question. Because your books are in Japan, or it's JP, are they bilingual or are they monolingual?
No, we represent we represent any publisher and all publishers, so we can get you any book you want. So having said that, there are certain publishers, there are probably about 50, that we represent exclusively, and some of them are publishing with bilingual texts and some of them are monolingual. We don't really have any that are monolingual Japanese there because they're English teaching texts mostly, or learning text. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. I just found it each class was a different one of your modalities, so that was hard to get used to. So one class has an LMS, and one is I received a PDF of the book in their ebook format, which was a little bit clumsy because it was hard to, you could only zoom in so much.
Sure.
And then I had to have a separate audio file for the listening portion. And then another one was just, I found an old edition. I just made a digital copy and shared it so that students could see which page we're on during the class.
And how was that? That was a PDF as well, I guess.
Yeah. So, but the issue is my edition. I didn't get a teacher's book until halfway through I haven't gotten one yet through the course. So my edition was 1 year previously. The content was exactly the same, but the page numbers and the numbering was different.
Sure.
And so the students are always confused.
Yeah, that's a really interesting example, actually, Mike, because if I understand it right, what you're saying is that you had an old edition of a book, so as a sort of an emergency provision, you got that as a PDF so that students could use it.
Right.
Because you got the content, right?
Yeah, the students had the book from the Seikyo. The Seikyo delivered their book.
Yep.
But I didn't get my book from the Seikyo.
Okay, right, yeah.
So I constantly say, is this the right page? Does it look like this?
Right. Yeah. So do you mean the teacher's copy of the student book or the teacher's manual?
No, the teacher's manual was very thin anyway. I just got the student's book.
Right.
Book from the previous
Okay.
edition.
But you had a previous edition of it, yeah. Well, there's one thing you could have done. You could have contacted us, because I bet we could have got you that book. Even if sometimes we work with the publisher, if it's depending on who it is, and if the publisher is friendly, because you're a teacher using their book, they would have got that for you.
Right.
We can help connect you if you ever need that sort of thing. Because quite often, if I say I've got a teacher, hello, Mr. Publisher, I've got a teacher with 30 students and they've all bought the book, but he needs a book, usually they'll be quite sympathetic to that.
Yeah.
So as I said in today, is I wanted to engage with the people that come so that I can try and help you with some of the pitfalls. And this is a good example, actually, Mike, and I'll also run through a couple of others, because we've all had a traumatic season, and the traumas that I get in the industry are different, but they're shared, actually, because they're all linked. We're all sharing pain here. All the things that that teachers have had to deal with are connected to us, and teachers look to us for solutions as an intermediary between the publisher, and sometimes we're very successful with that, and sometimes we're not. So in the case of what you've just said, Mike, I think that's a solution, and I'd really like to encourage teachers to speak to us at English Books JP, because we have a motto which is together in education, and of course companies have mottos, and it's all lost in the corporate mist of the world. I understand that, but every company that does take the time to do that does genuinely inside the company feel that they're offering something, and we certainly do, because this is our experience, is that sometimes it's a nice experience and sometimes not so nice, because obviously people get upset sometimes with things, but even in a normal world where you have just regular print, new editions and old editions, people can get very frustrated, and class provision gets challenged because of things like the page numbers or the cover being different or the audio being different, very small differences, because the way the publishing world is, that there's a constant change of these books or other content. They're revised constantly, so that's one area, and I often pick up these things after they're quite advanced, so by the time it gets to me, and a poor member of staff in Miyazaki has said, "Oh, I don't know what to do," and I'll give it to you. And my message to my staff over this summer has been, send it to me immediately, because we can probably find a solution. And if we cannot, then it's very important to decide that we cannot find a solution and move ahead. And in fact, that's another example that I'd like to share with you, that in the industry, and I was at several big publishers myself before I worked where I work now. So this comes from not the point of view of just a bookseller, it comes from the point of view of somebody who's been inside. Now, back in the 90s, when we were selling online academic materials, the drive of the publishers is always to own everything they do, of course, and that means the customers as well. They want to own the database of customers. They don't really want an intermediary, and why would they? Why would any company want an intermediary? That person or group in the middle must offer value, and I think currently we do. But what I'm trying to say is that the drive of all publishers is necessarily and correctly to think that in the long term, If things are provided digitally, then they should probably be provided centrally from the company. So I don't want to name a publisher because it's unfair. I'm not really picking on any publisher, but publisher X wants to be selling its digital materials directly. Now there's two reasons for that. It's not just cutting out somebody like us. It's not that at all. It's obviously it does make more money for them, but for us, customer care is the issue. So if there are, and there are hundreds of publishers and they're all offering different platforms, I've only got 10 people working with me. It's impossible for those 10 people to learn how to provide customer support for hundreds of digital platforms that are different. It just is not possible. So we also want to, we have to allow that direct channel, because the support can only be offered by the publisher. And it's simply a numbers thing, that if Oxford, Cambridge, which they all do, Macmillan, Pearson, they've all got different platforms. Then you've got the exam platforms, and then you've got all the small publishers on different platforms too. That providing customer care is simply not possible unless it's done by the experts who know their own systems. So what the message, the takeaway for the teachers today is that if you go with a publisher that has a fairly significant digital offering, that will almost inevitably mean that it has some kind of a platform, probably an LMS or some variation on an LMS. Now, I really recommend you ask yourself if your teaching infrastructure is set up for that. That means not just you, but if you're doing this with other colleagues, then that's, are they ready for it? And your colleagues could be your boss, the head of department, or it could be that you're the head of department and everybody else is looking to you. Who's going to train them on that platform? Also, bearing in mind you're not going to meet them, is the publisher going to offer you training? Because if it is, some of the platforms are quite, there's quite a complexity there. Others are pretty much, out the box, no problem. You can, like an Apple phone, you can just work it out yourself. So depending on what it is, then that's part of your decision. So it's not just about the content. So I had some cases with, in this case it was Pearson, but they were fine. They sorted it out in the end. But the problem was the teacher came to us because they bought their books from us and said, can you sort this out? So we tried our best and we spoke to Pearson, but of course they were overwhelmed. And they drive their support. Something to watch out for is with the big guys, the big publishers. I'm sure they're working on this. They must be recruiting somewhere. But they were overwhelmed worldwide, which meant that Japan, obviously, is just one country out of nearly 200. And it's very hard to get the response in the time you need it. So I think this should be a very big consideration in your decision making. What is it you're actually buying and relying on, and is the infrastructure there to support you? So that's quite a big area, I think, for the digital decisions. I'll just stop for a moment, see if there's any other questions for now. Okay. And what I'll do in a second is I'll show you a couple of examples of the things I was talking about then. So I think I'm clear to share the screen again now. Am I, Todd? If I can.
Yes, you are. Yes.
Still got the permission, if you like. Okay, so can you see the purple book?
Yes.
Yep.
I'm going to use the old toolbar for a minute. Okay, so this is just one way of showing a digital book. So that sort of popped up on my screen. I'm just making sure I've got the screens ready. Yeah. Okay. So this is a book that is from a small publisher, but it's digitized on a platform and has some fairly basic. So I've lost me. There we go. You guys are getting in the way of my button. I can turn the pages. And I can also go back to, there's just limited functionality here. You can jump to a page, you can play audio, things like this.
Track 2.
And I've now got my, there we go. So I have to keep moving you guys around. So, you know, we can just do things, rub it out, have your colouring. So you've seen this sort of thing in many places, but the main point I think for this sort of provision is that you can get the whole thing on one page. You can make it bigger and smaller. You can, for example, draw on it. So what I'm really getting back, we were just talking about systems and complexity, and now this is really just a book. There's nothing much more to this than the book, but I'll show you, you know, just to remind you, if you compare this to a PDF, it's a lot more slick, a lot more easy to show people. It fills the screen, it formats better. You've got some tools that maybe not always there on PDFs. And then another example, just sort of, this is a publisher that we represent, so I've got the access here, and this is more of what I was talking about, you know, just now with the systems, if you like. Now this one is eFuture, a publisher in Korea actually, and they've got a bit more. You can see there's classes here, and you've got your practice ebooks and extra things. I'm sure you've all seen something like this, but they provide this. They're mainly a children's publisher or young people with, this is like junior high school or something. So it's not so relevant for university teaching, but they provide this actually free for teachers that adopt their books. So it's not, there's no extra charge on the book. There's no additional charge elsewhere online. It's just provided as a sort of reward for people that subscribe, for people that adopt the printed books. Anything like this can change in the future, obviously, but if we open it, you can see it's a bit similar to the previous platform. This is only the book, okay? This is part of a slightly wider LMS that they offer you, but it has pretty much the same sort of functionality as FlexiTone, which was the other one. So just close that down again. So all I'm trying to say is that there are these different things you can have, but just very quickly, so if we look at, you may know Canvas. I don't have access to Canvas because we're not representing them, but Canvas is perhaps one of the biggest LMSs in the world, American company, Blackboard being another one. The reason I just flashed this up is to remind me to sort of go over the levels of complexity. So we've started with PDF at the bottom. Then you've got things like just the book on screen could be through an LMS like eFuture, or it could be, the other platform I showed you was FlexiTone, which is, there is an LMS there, but it's also designed just to show you the book. So it could just be the book, or it could be an LMS, say from Pearson or Oxford, which is book focused, shall we say. So you might buy your book, and if you buy another Oxford book, you may have it on the same platform, or another Pearson book, you may have it on the same platform. But then you've got this third level of complexity, which is something like Canvas or Blackboard, where all of your content is integrated into the overall system that your university has bought. So those levels have a huge implication for the teacher and your decision making. So depending on whether university insists that you use a certain platform, or whether you have the freedom to simply use the internet, where you can basically do anything, because you can use any internet browser-based content or platform as long as your university security will allow you. But if they insist that it has to be on Blackboard or on Canvas or something, then you're in a different situation. So all of these things will impact on the decision making. And just to recap why I mention all of that, it's because we had a lot of inquiries that after people had made their decisions, they came to us, which is a natural thing to ask us because we sold them the book. Can we do this? Can we do that? And of course, this is out of our control. Once you subscribe to a given system, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, that system will not necessarily, they won't give me and englishbooks.jp access to that system to help you out for good reasons. You know, as I said, we're not experts. We cannot be experts in everything. We cannot learn how to use Canvas and all the other LMSs that are out there because we don't have the resources for that. So these things are, I believe, almost totally hidden from most teachers that were thrown into this situation. And there are plenty, you know, the teachers that are already using online materials, then those guys will be fairly aware of these pitfalls already. And so, you know, so I'm not really offering much if you're one of those, but I'm assuming a sort of a wide variation here. So that, in a way, is most of what I wanted to say, but I wanted to now ask if there's any particular problems or questions about this whole issue that we could look at. So I'll just stop sharing for a second, go back. Yeah, so before I got an agenda which I wrote myself, but I thought with this kind of discussion, there might be a question here or some comments, feedback that means I can address something specifically you need, having given you sort of a summary of what I've got to offer, if you like. So just, I'll pause for a moment. Are there any other questions at this stage?
Yes, Michael raised his hand. Michael, you want to unmute?
I thought a book that probably has a pretty good digital or computer-based workbook as part of the set, but it's a DVD-ROM.
Wow,
and
yes.
I held it up to my students and they went, "What's that? We don't have one of those." And
Sure.
Or maybe they have a DVD player for their, but the DVD-ROM won't work on the TV.
No.
And I didn't find any resources online that had that same program.
Sure.
To assign some digital homework, and it seemed like a waste of a pretty good resource. It was probably clunky. It was probably designed 15 years ago, but
yeah. What was the publisher for that?
Cambridge.
Right.
Cambridge Face to Face.
Okay, and that
It has
is that book still going? Do you know?
I think it's the end of its life cycle. That
Right.
might be one of the things. Like it's the one that's about to be updated and about to have a new LMS. So maybe that's the new edition will.
Yeah, so a big publisher like Cambridge, I imagine that's definitely true. Because of the resources that a big publisher will have, and this year, last year, I mean, we've seen in the industry a huge shift. This is before the pandemic situation, in audio, of course, to downloads and a move away from CDs or multi-ROMs or DVD-ROMs, things like all of these things, because of the print runs of these books. It seems like very, very few as a percentage are actually used. Whereas if it's all mounted online, then the publisher and the people like us in the middle, you know, we're the logistics for those items are actually quite expensive, because firstly you have to make them, which costs. Then you have to stick them in the book,
Right.
and that costs both for the stickiness and the person doing the sticking or the machine doing the sticking. And then you quite often have problems with the way they stack. So I know this is quite boring, you don't want to know about it. All we need to remember here is that the logistics of having an extra physical item does make a lot of cost, and is also just like 10 years ago, the sat nav in our car was a DVD in the back.
Right.
And then especially in Japan, as the construction kits in, suddenly the road is changed and the sat nav it hasn't. But now, of course, that's all downloaded through, and you probably use your phone for sat nav now anyway, which is updated constantly. So it's the same sort of thing. So, and I'm sure with a big publisher, Mike, that they will be that looks like an old material to me. As the, however, if teachers get into a situation, which you often do, where there's materials that are possibly a bit older, we can quite quickly check whether those are around or not. I mean, if you give me the number on the back of that one, I could find out when the office opens what's going on with that title in particular. And we did do a fair amount of that over the early summer. But a big part of the decision making really is, if you have this digital thing, what are you going to do with it? So this is back to the basic really, and it's really actually the last thing I was going to address really, is the sort of, it's worth sitting down in an armchair with a cup of cocoa or something, or if it's in the evening, have a beer, and when you're making your decision, thinking through your real objectives, especially now that you're experienced, because every teacher now is very experienced in using Zoom for teaching and using whatever it is you've used in the last few months. So you will have no doubt had some successes and been burned by other problems as well. But of course, nobody has experienced everything. So what I can do is, I haven't experienced everything, of course, but I've been in the middle of a lot of different experiences. And what I'm trying to do is reflect back more, thinking that, you may have had one, but not the other. So if we just reflect them back to you, then you can build this into your decision making going forward. And the last thing that I'm getting at is that real definition of what, if it's the right word at all, what digital classroom and digital teaching is in your context, in your own context, because universities, and we hear this in the media every day, the government, the newspapers, the online newspapers, the TV channels, the educational press, they use terms such as, the new normal digital classroom and things like this, but it actually means something different to everybody, especially now because of this state of evolution that we're at, with no clear idea of who the winners will be in the long run. And if you remember right at the beginning of this, I said the first digital stuff I sold was in '97. And at that time, this was to libraries and universities, the publishers were all trying, and I was a publisher, I was one of them. The publishers were all trying to deliver what they wanted to deliver and sell. And in the long run, which was about 10 years in total, and it was as Google became whatever it is, the leader, one of the leaders in this sort of arena, is that everything, it wasn't owned by Google, but it all mimicked Google. It started mimicking Amazon quite early on, and then it mimicked Google. And what it all morphed into was a one-stop shop situation where the functionality was the same, more or less the same, whatever you were buying, whether it was a Wiley journal or a OUP journal or Sage journal, they were delivered on the same platform. And I'm pretty sure we can expect that to happen in ELT, but it's going to take some time. So right now we've got the practical situation of thinking things through. And I keep telling you there's one more thing and not actually telling you what it is. And the one more thing is, as we try to make a definition of what digital means to us, think about Moodle. Can you just raise your hand and show me if you've used Moodle, or put a mark up? Yeah, yeah. So most teachers are familiar with Moodle, and if it's not Moodle, there may be something else similar that you've used. Where I think, would you agree with me? Is Moodle a learner management system? I think it's more than that. I think it's a learner and content management system, but I'm happy if you want to correct me on call it something different. I'm not aware if there's a particular way of referring to Moodle in that sense. Moodle is what?
It's a teaching management system.
Teaching management system. That's fine. Let's use that for now. So, and the big difference there is that when I showed you the eFuture site, which was simply an example, and the Canvas, and we've got Blackboard, Oxford and Pearson, all that lot. They're really platforms that are showing you content. They are providing content. There is obviously variation there, but Moodle to me is a completely different approach. And so what you can do is you can publish yourself, especially for your own students. And in fact, we work with directly with about 50 odd publishers. Directly, what I mean is we exclusively handle them. And they tend to be small publishers, like the book out front. That's that guy only publishes a few books, and that's one of them. But he's not a big guy publisher. He's a teacher and publishes a few books, and that's typical of some of the people we work with. So in a sense, it's already started to happen. But one or two of our partner publishers like that, they've started doing this on Moodle. I know that I don't think you'd mind me saying, Brian Colin down in Nagoya is he's got books that are published, and he's basically taken a digital razor blade to them and sliced them up and presents them very, very nicely on Moodle, and he's using them for his classes. And if he was here today, he could tell us a bit about it. But I've seen the system, it's great. And that's an option. I mean, if he's already written his book, but every teacher probably has a lot of materials that you've written. You may not have turned it into a book, but you will undoubtedly have documents on documents on documents of material that you've made and used in the classroom. Well, that can be put into a place, whether it's Moodle or a Google system, whoever. You're basically authoring your own content, but the two big things here are you're authoring it, which is taking a lot of your time. And the second thing is that little digital razor blade that I said in a couple of words is, and Brian was telling me about it, it's very hard work, because you have to, it's coding things in, it's manipulating images, getting everything to be in the right place at the right time. And when it's done, it's great. But you do have to put a lot of time into that. So if it's something you're doing on your own, that obviously needs to be something you're happy doing. And the sort of final full circle on that is that more often than not, we find that publishers don't really want to be presenting content on Moodle as a system. And yet in the long term, we're probably going to see the Moodle pattern, whether it's Moodle themselves or not, but the pattern of a fairly universal, meaning there'll be one or two or three of them around the world, leaders in sort of system provision, where the teachers can suck in content from a publisher and legally and correctly use it. They can also make their own content and use it, obviously, but also restrict it, but also sell it as well, because if you've put that time in, you might want to sell it to other universities too. And also, have the practicalities in there as well. But in the meantime, before we get to the ideal, you've got your next decision to make. So I really, with all the things I've said here, I think I've covered most of what I needed to. It was about trying to sort of provoke questions, problems, ideas, and in the last few minutes, if there's anything I can help with, please let me know and we'll address those questions.
Well, I wish more people had come to find out what resources are actually available. So I'm muted again.
Thanks, Mike. But the good thing is we've recorded it. So.
Yeah.
And I'll only charge a small fee for people that didn't turn up on the day. Don't worry. Any other questions? And if not, I know it's 10 minutes early, but that's actually what I came to say. So unless there's more questions, there's no reason to just go.
Time for a tea. Time for a tea before the next one.
That's right. That's
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, well, thank you so much. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you, Colin, for the wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I got to host this one and participate. So, thank you.
Thanks.
And I will leave the room open for a while if you just want to sit and chat and keep it as a hangout room. And then the next presentation is the plenary, which will start at 3:30, I believe.
Oh, that's not for a while then. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a break time now.
Oh, okay.
So Colin, thank you so much. You were very kind to me because, like I said, this is the first time I've ever hosted, and I was terrified it wouldn't go well. So you're very kind man.
I kind of guessed. I think I was thinking, you know, things ought to be simple for this because, you know, I'm no expert either, and I think whoever I'm dealing with may or may not be. But yeah, keep it simple and restrict the number of things that can go wrong.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's actually quite complex how they have it set up.
Yes, it is.